immigration show with attorney Ms. Prashanthi Reddy from the law offices of Prashanthi Reddy PLLC. Please note that Sakshi TV now has 3 immigration shows every week. On Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. EST with attorney Ms. Prashanthi Reddy in English, Thursday at 5:30 p.m. EST with attorney Chand Parvatnini, and on Friday at 6 p.m. EST with attorney Bhanu Indra. Please tune in to ask your questions. If you're an immigration attorney and would like to join our special shows, please email us at usa@sakshi.com or call 866-725-7441. Before we begin the show, please note that the information provided on this show is not a legal advice and is for general informational purposes only. Sakshi TV or its agents will not be responsible for use of information. If you need specific legal advice, please contact the attorney directly. Ms. Prashanthi needs no introduction, but if you need consultation, please log on to readyesq.com for contact information. And when you connect with them, don't forget to mention Sakshi TV. From the beginning, readyesq.com has put a wealth of free information and online tools in the hands of immigrant community and for the benefit of US employers. The readyesq.com site provides you with latest and cutting-edge information on US immigration law and policies explained in terms you don't have to be a lawyer to understand. Today's topic is the F1 and H1 do's and don'ts. We will continue the knowledge session along with the news and updates on latest immigration, followed by Q&A. Before we get into the topic, you can call us on the numbers on the screen for questions related to immigration and also ask for tips. Hi, Ms. Reddy, how are you doing?
Hi, Tony. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So before we get into the topic, Ms. Reddy, just wanted to quickly ask if you have any updates.
No, we're going to dive right into the topic as it's a pretty lengthy topic, so I want to make sure we cover everything.
And we do have some questions ready, Ms. Reddy, so should I shoot right away?
Yeah, please go ahead. Today, just for the viewers who may have missed it, we're talking about the change of status from an F1 to a H1. We know that the H1B CAP registration is coming up on March 1st, so I thought this would be an apt topic for those students who want to file for registration and want to file for a change of status from an F to a H. There are certain unique issues that occur with change of status from F to H, and I thought we should discuss that today.
Right. You know the best, Ms. Reddy, you're best in the business, and we trust you on that for sure. So the first question we're going to ask is, how can a person change their status from F1 to H1B?
So in order to change your status from an F1 to H1, you have to file an I-129 petition. To start off with, it depends on what status. Also, we have to see what status you're presently on. So you could be on an F1, but what kind of an F1? Meaning that you could be on curricular practical training of your F1. You could be on optional practical training on your OPT. You could presently be in school and maybe you haven't completed your degree as yet. Or you could be on, there are 2 types of OPT, STEM OPT and the 1-year OPT immediately after completion of your degree. So you could be on any of those statuses. So depending on what status you're on, there's slight differences in documents required, etc.
Right.
So if you are, for example, on your OPT, if you're on, say, CPT, then you're still in school, you'd have to show certain documentations to show that you're in status on CPT and that you're working as well as going to school and you're maintaining your status as a full-time student in school, etc. So certain nuances depending on what type of F1 you're on.
Right.
With reference to the process, overall the process is the same in the sense that, say if you're on OPT, then you have to file for your H1 before the completion of your OPT or within the 60 days grace period. So timing is important, whatever type of F1 you're on, whichever stage of F1 you're on. If you're in school, then you have to submit proof that you are in full-time student status from your school. You have to get that proof. And as long as you're in full-time student status as of October 1st, because remember the F1 to H1, you're getting a H1 as of October 1st, you're filing it 6 months in advance. So you have to continue maintaining your status as of until October 1st, right? So you have to make sure that either your OPT is going to continue until October 1st or there's something called CAP, and we'll get into that later. But first, I think what you need for a H1, other than making sure you're in status, is an employer. You need a H1 sponsoring employer. You have to have a confirmed bona fide job offer. By this, it means that your employer has to have work available for you, which means that if it's, say, a consulting situation, say an IT consulting, you're working for an IT consulting company, for example, they have to show that they have a contract for you. So they'll have to produce a end client letter maybe, or a vendor letter, MSA, PO, something of that nature to show that you have a contract, that they have a contract for you with a client. If they're producing, if they're a software development company, if they're a product development company, then they should just give a brief description of the product that you're going to develop and show some proof that there is a product in place for you to work on. So this is called non-speculative employment. It's important for the employer to show that employment is not speculative. So therefore, you have to have an employer. The employer has to be obviously a bona fide business. So they should have been incorporated, they should have an office space, right? And they should have a bona fide job offer for you.
Right.
That's the first thing with reference to what you need to file a H1. To transfer from a F1 to a H1, you need a bona fide employer. Now, depending on the time that you're filing it, if, for example, well, in the F1 case, it's always under the cap, because presumably you've never been on a H1. If you haven't, then you fall under the cap. So you can only file your petition starting with the registration on March 1st. So coming to the registration, the first step is obviously the H1B registration. That starts from March 1st and ends on March 17th. March 1st noon to March 17th noon is the registration. So your company will register for you, and all those applications that go in as part of the registration process, they will then hold a lottery for all those applications. And if you are picked in the lottery, which we, maybe 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 chances of being picked, based on last year's, the number of cases filed last year, which is close to 500,000. And as we know, the cap is 65,000 for bachelor's degree holders and 20,000 for the master's degree holders. So altogether 85,000, out of which about 480,000 registrations were filed last year. So that's why I'm saying out of 1 out of 5 or maybe 1 out of 4 cases will be picked. Once your employer does the registration for you, after March 17th, so between March 17th and April 1st, they will hold the lottery and they will send the results. Now, if you are lucky enough to be picked, you will know by your employer will know by April 1st. And then the employer has to file a change of status application or a counselor processing application, depending on your situation, before June 30th. So you have 90 days to file your H1B petition. The first step in filing is getting a labor condition approval from the Labor Department. This is done by filing what's called LCA, or Labor Condition Application, with the Labor Department on their portal. The Labor Condition Application basically has some attestations with reference to the fact that you have to say that you're going to be paying the prevailing wage. You have to select the appropriate level in the prevailing wage. You have to put in your job title, the work location. So first, before filing the LCA, in order to get the prevailing wage, you can do it several ways. You can look up the prevailing wage in the Department of Labor website, FLCA data. That's the website. And you can look it up. You have to look it up by job title as well as by job location. And you have to choose, they're level 1 to 4. So you have to choose the appropriate level, depending on your experience and your qualifications, right? Once you've chosen that, you put in the prevailing wage, you've identified it, you've put in the prevailing wage into the LCA. You have to mark all the other columns correctly. You have to identify if you're not working at your employer's location. If you're working at a different location, you have to identify that location. And so the employer has to sign the LCA. and file it online with the Labor Department. The Labor Department takes about 5 to 7 business days to approve your petition. And once the petition is approved, you can go ahead then and file your I-129 document. This is form I-129 and has 3 forms: I-129, I-129H, which is the H supplement, and the I-129DC. So there's a lot of information in those forms, and they have to be filled out appropriately. Now, once you fill it out, and the employer and the attorney, if there's an attorney, they sign in the proper places. You have to the employer has to put in their checks, the appropriate fee for the H-1B, and you need, of course, the proper supporting documents. If you're on F1, you'd have to show that, you'd have to show proof of your status. Say if you're on OPT, you have to show your pay stubs to show that you are actually working on OPT, because there's certain terms and conditions, right, on whereby you're maintaining your OPT. There's certain terms and conditions which you have to follow to maintain your OPT, whether it be, it's different for STEM OPT, it's different for post-completion OPT, 2 different types. You have to show all your previous I-20s, you have to show, if you're, depending again on what your status exactly is. If you're presently in school, you have to get a letter from the school that you're, a full-time student meeting all the requirements. If you're on CPT, then you have to get information from your school that you're on curricular practical training and why curricular practical training is needed by your school, and how the work that you're doing is related to your curricular practical training. Because you actually get credits for that CPT, so it has to be related to your area of study. Also, you'll have to submit your I-94 and copy of the certified LCA, an offer letter from your employer, a letter from the petitioner talking about the salary, the period of time that they wish to employ you, your job duties, etc. These are some of the documents, in addition to proof of job documents. If you're working for another location for a client, then most probably have to submit some kind of a client letter or vendor letter, etc., etc. So these are the documents that you need. You submit all those documents. You can file premium processing if it is allowed at that period of time. If you do file premium processing, you get your response back in 30 days, which could be either a request for further evidence or it could be an approval if you're lucky. So once you get that approval, you have then you can start from October 1st or whenever the H1 gets approved, whichever is later, right? And until that point of time, you have to maintain your status.
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, but going a few steps behind, there also, after the COVID relief, there are also quite a lot of students who've newly probably gone to the States in the last 1 year. And for those, could you please explain the OPT for F1 students?
The OPT is, I guess, totally we're focusing on change of status from F to H. So OPT is optional practical training, and optional practical training, I guess we should do another session on F1s itself. But you have pre-completion OPT and post-completion OPT. Pre-completion OPT is where you have to work. But it's a certain period of time, and it can be voluntary. But the OPT, which is also called the STEM OPT, is where you have to actually be paid, but again, there's a certain period of time that you need to work for out of the entire OPT period. Now, pre-completion OPT, as I said, 2 types of OPT. Pre-completion OPT is when you're working while you're still in school. You can take OPT even while you're in school by, showing some kind of a hardship, etc. Post-completion OPT is after the completion of your degree, and that's usually given for 12 months, provided the degree duration was at least for 9 months. So if you used up part of your OPT during your course of study, then that will be deducted from the post-completion OPT. So that's OPT. And then, of course, you have STEM OPT.
Right. And STEM OPT, briefly explained, is for, extend.
for science, technology, engineering, and math
Engineering and
majors.
management. Yeah, right. Right. So, while we're on the topic, could you actually please explain to us the advantages and disadvantages of F1 and H1B visas?
Yeah, so there is an obvious, I mean, there are advantages and disadvantages of both, but it depends on, what time, when you're at what time you want to change, or where you're at with your student status, and then accordingly you can decide, whether you need to change from an F1 to H1 at that particular period or not. So, so the advantages and disadvantages really depend on that. For example, if you have completed all your OPTs, you've exhausted your STEM OPT as well as your regular OPT, then you don't really, and you don't want to go back and do another course, and you want to start working, then obviously H1 is the way to go. But say you still have OPT, and you've not completed your 3 years of STEM OPT and regular OPT, then the question mark is whether you want to file a H1 that particular year, or you want to continue on OPT. I think nowadays, with the high volume of registrations being filed, it might make sense to give yourself as many chances as possible to try. I know earlier people would wait until they completed their entire OPT and then they would file for the H1B gap petition after they exhausted their OPT, because they want to make sure that they get maximum period in the US. But I think that no longer makes sense. I think as soon as you complete your studies, you should immediately start filing for H1B registration, because this will maximize the number of chances that you get. Since you're on OPT and you get 3 years in total, you can actually file for that registration every year, right? So for 3 years, you can continuously try to get, if you get it in your first year, great. And there is no sense really in, I mean, there is an advantage of OPT, obviously, because there is no particular wage that you have to pay. So for your employer, there's an advantage in keeping you on an OPT. The other advantage is, if you're continuing to study, of course, then you should be on an F1 rather than being on a H1. You could work. The criteria on a OPT is not as strict as on a H1. It doesn't have to be a specialty occupation. As long as it's related to your area of study, you're fine. So there's no question of a denial of OPT, of getting an OPT, because it's not a specialty occupation. So now it's easier in a way to get OPT than it is to get a H1. And also there's, as I said, the wage, there's no minimum or maximum wage that you're required to pay. If you change employers, it's easier. You don't have to file an amendment or transfer, though you do have to inform your DSO. The disadvantages of staying on an OPT are, one is if you don't keep trying, as I said, you're decreasing your chances of getting into the cap. So you have to keep trying for that and file your registration as soon as you graduate. The second is, on an F1, there's no dual intent. So you can't really file for a green card. While when you're on a H1, there's a dual intent, and you can be on a H1 and file for the green card as well. So it becomes a little easier when you're on a H1 when compared to an F1. And the obvious disadvantages on an F1, you have a limited duration of OPT. It's only for 3 years. It cannot be extended further. So you have to get onto a H1 at some point, right? So that is the disadvantages and advantages of being on an F1. So you have to weigh what's better for you. Now, with reference to advantages of being on a H1, there are very obvious advantages. One is dual intent that we just talked about. You can file for a green card. You can file for a H1 really now for an unlimited period of time, because it is 6 years, but once you get an I-140 approved, then you can keep extending your H1, while you can't do that on an F1 OPT. So the obvious advantage is time, And especially for Indian nationals, since the green card takes so long, there has to be a way of continuing to work without having to pay the school fee, right? You're paying a school fee otherwise, and you're working and studying at the same time. So if what you want is to work full time, then of course H1 is the way to go, not an F1. The disadvantage is, again, the disadvantage is the cap, because you may or may not get into the lottery system because there is a limited 65,000 H1s issued per year. So that's the biggest disadvantage. Also, something to consider is that students in certain fields of study may face difficulty in actually filing the H1. Say you are business administration, you have a business administration degree or a marketing degree, and you have to file a H1 in a marketing field. It's more difficult to get that H1 approved and to show that it's a specialty occupation when compared to filing a H1, say, in the IT field, or as an accountant, or as a lawyer, or some other professional, a doctor. Those types of H1s are much easier. So there's a disadvantage in the H1 in the sense that not all occupations qualify for a H1, but all occupations will qualify for an OPT as long as the course is at least 9 months. And for STEM OPT occupation, you qualify as long as you're a STEM graduate. So it's easier to get an OPT when compared to a H1.
Right. And Ms. Reddy, while we're on that, what are the documents to show for a student for a student on the maintenance of status? I mean, what is the criteria for a student?
Right. So this, as I was saying in the beginning of the show, that there's some things that are unique for F1 to H1 change of status applications, because there's certain documentation that they require from a student, which they may not require from people who have other statuses. So oftentimes we will get an RFE for a student, and they ask for proof of status, proof of maintenance of status, basically are the documents that they ask for. So we like to provide these ahead of time, or at least make the student aware that they have to get these documents ready. The documents basically are depending on the person's status. If the person was on OPT, switched to CPT, again went on a STEM OPT, has 2 master's degrees, there might be a whole bunch of documentation required to show that he is in status from day one of his F1 to the time that he filed the H1. So that could be, if you're on OPT, then they might ask for, of course, all the EADs, proof that you actually got authorization to work. For the OPT, they might ask for a letter from your employer to show that you worked the required period of time on the OPT. If you're on CPT, curricular practical training, this is something that the university can allow if the course requires a practical element or a work element to the theoretical element. So some schools actually even offer day 1 CPT, and this could mean showing more documentation when you take a day 1 CPT, because then they'll ask you to show why the school requires you to be on a CPT day 1. So you have to show that maybe it's executive track program where they require parallelly working and gaining experience and studying the theory in the classroom. You'd have to show the relationship between what you're doing, meaning the work that you're doing, and the degree, the subjects that you're studying. You have to show a direct relationship in the form of a map or a diagram as to how both elements are related for the CPT. So see, these are some of the documents that you need. You have to show that you went to school physically, unless there's there are some new rules for COVID where you can do things online. But they want to make sure that you actually went to school physically, except the exception is the COVID regulations. Also, they want to make sure that if you're living very far from the school, like maybe you're in a different state, as per your I-129 petition, your address is there, and your school is in a different state, how you commuted, and did you actually physically go in for classes? Show proof of that. So they want to see, or say where you stayed, maybe a lease to show that you stayed in school or close to school during your classes, your food bills, your other expenses, how you commuted, did you take a flight to take your classes every week, so then your flight tickets or your itineraries. So these are some of the things that they ask for change of status students.
Right. And with that, Ms. Reddy, we get towards the last question for our session today. Could you also please tell us about the cap gap extension?
Right, very important. I'm glad you asked, because for another unique thing for change of status applications, which applies only to F1s, is that they have this law called the cap gap.
And what if a person doesn't qualify for it too, Ms. Reddy?
Right. So while you're waiting, in general, before this cap gap rule came into place, or for any other change of status application, you have to show, as I said, that you're in status as of the date of October 1st, which is the start date of the new fiscal year, which is when your H1 actually starts. You're filing it 6 months in advance, but it actually starts on October 1st. So before the cap gap law, the students had to maintain their status until October 1st, which means that they'd have to make sure their OPT didn't expire, or they would have to, if they did, or if their master's program was over or whatever, they would have to take another master's program or do a PhD and maintain their F1 student status. But now with the cap gap law, the cap gap law basically says that as of the date of filing the H1, whatever was your status, F1 status, whether it was on OPT or you were in say CPT, or you were just a student, full-time student, whatever that status, that will be extended until October 1st to bridge the gap between your status and the start date of October 1st. So it's artificially extended, whatever your status was. So after October 1st, there could be a situation where your H1 has not yet gotten approved, because if there's no premium processing, or if your employer doesn't file in premium processing or files late, it's possible that the H1 is still not approved come October 1st. If that happens, then as soon as October 1st, before on September 29th itself, you'll have to again extend your F1 status by taking additional courses, or maybe taking another semester. So you have to extend your F1 status by going back to school. Same thing applies if you don't qualify for the cap gap extension also.
Yeah, Ms. Reddy, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have a caller.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. Welcome to Sakshi Show. Hi, can you hear us? Hello. Think we lost the caller. Sorry, Ms. Reddy, please go on.
So, so that's a cap gap extension. So how do you get cap gap extension? You basically have to file your H1B petition and give a copy of your H1B petition to your DSO, designated student advisor, and the DSO will then update the CVIS system with your cap gap information, and your status then will automatically be extended until October 1st. So remember, if you're on OPT at the time of filing the H1, you will continue to be on OPT. So if you are in your 60 days grace period, then you will not be able to work during that time. You will continue to be in that grace period where you cannot work, and you just have to wait for the H1 to come to work. So that's what cap gap is about.
Mr. Reddy, I think we have another caller too. Hi, if you can hear us, could you please unmute so that we can hear you? Hi, can you hear us? Please unmute. We are not able to hear you. Yeah, I think we lost them. Sorry, Ms. Reddy. Right. So you were telling us about the cap gap extension. And
I think the cap gap has been,
Right. With that, I think we come to the end of the show. And Ms. Reddy, like always, we know you're the best in the business, and we're more than privileged to host somebody like you on our show. And we're always eternally grateful for the humongous amounts of information that you share with us and our viewers, and for supporting the immigrant community so strongly. Thank you so much for representing us, Ms. Reddy. It's a
You're
pleasure.
welcome, Torni. You're welcome.
Thank you. You're watching Sakshi TV Live. This is Torani.